I'm Alexandra Kreis, and you're listening to Outer Travel in a Journey. Journeying now for 30 years into the life and practice of yoga, I have met many who have taken interesting turns, went past extraordinary bumps, and reached unexpected places. People with whom I shared conversations about everyday struggles, intimate realizations, larger questions, ideas, and dreams. So today, I'm passing on the mic to one of them so we could hear and celebrate the wisdom in people's differences and experiences. So through this, you mentioned this before, body positive community. I haven't come across it. Can you tell a little bit about what's the work behind it?
Yeah, well, body positivity has been around for quite a while, and it was actually started by like lesbian women back in the day, fatter lesbian women, and who were just like, their bodies, their sexuality were radical. And so they kind of were like, we're going to just be positive about our body. And that in itself was a radical act. And so they kind of started this movement, which has gradually seeped into popular culture, which is pretty cool. It has been taken sometimes a little bit differently than what it intended, but often it's not acknowledged the roots and where it came from. So it came from, but a lot of people are basically saying, I've had enough of this. I've had enough of the energy and time that was robbed from me. I've had enough of chasing a beauty ideal, and I'm going to show my body in its truth. And sometimes, it might not necessarily mean that they love it all the time, but they are showing it and they're talking about it. And when I say they, it's usually someone who is an advocate or a quote unquote influencer in online spaces, who is just talking about their experiences, sharing with the community. There's a lot of movement around health at every size, which is stopping the discrimination of fat bodies. Often someone might come into a doctor's office and they're in a bigger body, and instead of treating the symptoms, they're treating the fatness, because we have so ingrained that equals they're in poor health. And then they might have cancer, or they might have something else going on that actually becomes undetected. So it's stopping, there's a lot of fat phobia in our culture, and body positivity is also combating that. And this idea of treating everyone as equal. We're in Black Lives Matter movements and Black Lives Matter, we're talking about that. But often people who are in bigger bodies can be really discriminated, maybe not in the life-threatening way of police, but they can be discriminated in all kinds of awful ways. And on a day-to-day basis, if you follow some of these women in bigger bodies, they'll share with you the abuse that they receive, on a daily, weekly basis. It's disgusting and horrible. And, we know that shame doesn't work. So when people say, oh, I'm saying this because I want you to be healthier, it's like shame could be potentially the most damaging thing to someone that there is. So in broad terms, that's kind of the body positive movement, and there's a lot of people in online spaces advocating and talking about this stuff, and they probably sit on a spectrum, as in with any movement, but it's been personally really helpful for me. I don't think that my work is necessarily limited to just sort of body acceptance. I think it's acceptance of all kinds and promoting kindness and self-care. And as you said, taking care of yourself so that you can be empathetic towards others. Emotional resilience, all that kind of stuff is really important to me. So I did come out with a second book, which is only available in Australia at the moment, but it was called Me Time, and it was kind of for, I guess, older, so maybe your teens to your adults, around just really accessible ways that you can take care of yourself, and some of the research and in why that you should be doing that. Because for me, I'm a practical brain too, so it kind of helps to understand what this is doing for my body, for my mind, and it's all in time, so you can dip in. It's like 1 minute, 5 minute, 10 minute, that kind of stuff. So that's been really lovely to hear back people having that in their bedside and dipping in and feeling that. I love the feedback I've been getting, and this is what I hoped, is that it's every time they open it, they don't feel overwhelmed or that they're not doing good enough. They feel that they've done something just by doing something little, and that they feel good about that, which I think is those stepping stones. But in momentum, I've got something coming out in Australia in September that I'm really excited about. And it's basically, I wrote this book because of the challenges that was facing girls, and it was holding them back from achieving their full potential. And so I've written something for boys that I feel is holding them back from achieving their full potential. And it's basically a love your body boy version, but it's about self-love, it's about self-care, it's about emotional resilience, but it's also about redefining what it means to be male and what it means to be a boy, to be a man. And I think that is just trapping them in this tiny man box.
Yes.
It means that they're causing harm to themselves. They're also in adulthood causing harm to others sometimes. And it's restricting them from being their true selves. And I think that is just robbing. It's just awful when you're robbed from that freedom to be yourself. I think that is the greatest theft. So that's kind of what I'm working on for boys, and it's called Be Your Own Man. And I think that my amazing German publisher might bring it on into Germany too. We'll see how we go, but I hope they will, because they've just been amazing. They're just the best publisher. Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm going, and then I just think I'm already thinking up new ideas. I want to provide, appropriate, informed, positive sex education to teenagers.
Yes.
That would be really awesome, because that is just something that's missing from our curriculum. And I think curriculums all over the world, we're just moving through, understanding our bodies more, like you were saying about puberty. I just read a book called Period Power by Maisie Hill, and it was amazing. And I just learned things about my own body that I didn't know, and learned about my cycle in a really empowering way, in a way that makes me feel like it's not a burden or the worst thing to happen, but actually so natural and beautiful, and I can work with it instead of against it. So more of that kind of stuff, I hope. I'm just going to keep trying to be as intuitive as possible, because that's, I think, when the best stuff happens.
You also, what came into your life was that you felt you wanted to write a book. Can you talk a little bit about that project, where it started off, for example? How did you come to that idea?
Yes. I started a blog that's in Swedish, where I started to write about my yoga journey. And I didn't start the blog when I started the yoga, but I had to start the blog when I felt so alone in my practice. And I felt like all my best yoga friends were abroad. They were not here. And my teachers doesn't live in my country. So I felt like I needed some kind of a connection with other souls. So I started it, and I wrote it for almost every day for 10 years. And then I felt like, this is enough. I'm done here. But it was a very good time, because I got a lot of friends virtually in different countries, a couple of friends in Finland, and it felt really nice to share our thoughts about the struggle, because I was so surprised over the struggle for me. It felt like if I look into a paper about yoga, or not the deep yoga books about asanas and theory and all that history, but it was all glamour. It was like, you should be very thin, you should be very flexible, you should be very blonde.
Which you were at the time.
But very, very white. It was just one small piece of humans that were showing off. And I couldn't recognize anything for myself in that. So the blog had a Swedish name, En aning om yoga, and it's difficult to translate it to English, but it says like a sense of yoga, because I felt like this is a big ocean, and I have just dived in somewhere, and I have to swim further. And some of my readers just encouraged me to write a book. So that's where it came from. And I always like to write. So I ended up writing the book and publishing it myself and selling it, and got a lot of PR, can you say? I was in the radio and interviewing. People were interviewing on different places. And I got a lot of nice feedback from my readers. And the book, it's all about me trying to bow my head.
Can you tell your favorite part of the book, or like, you know, or what has resonated? If you don't have a favorite part, if somebody said, or if people come back to you about, maybe you can share a tiny story, at least so we get a sense of what you're writing about.
Yeah, it was like kind of my everyday life, to get up in the morning and get myself on my mat. And it hasn't always been natural for me to do that. I remember once I was lying in my bed for 1 hour trying to talk myself out on the floor until I finally did it.
Yeah.
And I realized more and more that my center is in my lower belly. That's where I have my breathing from. But once we were out in the car, my husband and I, we had been visiting some friends, and it was getting dark, and he suddenly, it jumped out an animal on the road, and I got so afraid, but I didn't get afraid up here as I usually was. It was more like the feeling was in my lower belly, and it was like spreading out like a net, and I felt like, wow, I'm really in my center, and I never felt that before. And it was like those small situations in every person's life that showed me that I'm into something else now, and it takes time. And my teacher always says you have to be persistent and you have to trust the process. And that's what I really learned. The more I trust the things I do, and the more I get what I need.
It's funny when you kind of brought in this character that, is it the surfer who talks Irish?
No, it's the banyan tree. Oh, banyan.
Yes, the banyan tree. Yeah. Why did you choose that? That's what I wanted to know.
Okay, well, I have
question to the author.
No, this is funny. There are a few places in the book that were hard to write, and the part in the forest where Bharat, the bully, and young Yogi end up being in detention, and their detention process has them, in this banyan forest, and that formed because not only was I trying to, figure out what these sutras mean and then tell it in a story in a simple way that someone could understand, but also that the order of the sutras were the structure of the story. And I was also trying to tell a story that had drama and intrigue and conflict and all the things you need for good storytelling. So at that point in the book, there were other versions that were just terrible. So eventually the banyan forest came to life, and then O'Banion came as the character to kind of, I don't know why he came, but he came after all this struggle of like not being able to tell that part of the story in a way that was exciting. And actually Irish, the people I know from Ireland, they usually think that part's very funny. Just because they relate to the sayings and just the manner of the tree.
It was interesting to me because on a lot of people who get to know spirituality, they associate it either with Japan or with India, so then we start thinking, I mean, I've got asked, is your, like when I was teaching more yoga, is your teacher from India? And then when you say he's not, then suddenly he's not the right thing. So I found that interesting that you chose like something so wise and old to be Irish.
But there's such a history. I never thought of it in that way, like, oh, it just happened, and it was one of those things that happened. But the book is it's a strange universe. The young yogi world is this weird universe, and for me it's like it has a lot of elements of India, but it's not India. It's, they're talking trees and there's talking chickens. And I specifically also wanted like the characters to not actually be kind of defined by color exactly, like he's a white boy, or do you know what I mean? I wanted there to be this universality of understanding, so that the characters weren't kind of in a way defined exactly like that's an Indian guy, although there are definitely elements of that, because I love India. I spent so much time there, and uh, the book is a reflection of, I think, things that I love, and a lot of the characters were deliberate. Like the imaginations were an amalgamation of the Supremes, and I kind of was thinking of the songs in Willy Wonka, and I just thought, wow, and to have these kind of a million folded heads like the deities in India it's great. I think I was just like, I loved creating that. I was so excited. and Bharat was like meant to be just a very small character, and he inserted himself through the story with his whole journey and transition. I didn't do that. I didn't plan that. He was just supposed to be like the bully on the sidelines.
I'm already hoping for more books, Sonja.
Well, this is all of Sadhanapada, all the sutras written down with all the different translations, and this is how I started also with Young Yogi, was like just synthesizing all the information first. So that's all in here. So I've been doing that, and the seed, I'm planting the seeds.
Very good.
Sowing the soil for Sadhanapada.
And so when you write poems, I remember my school poetry as well, and I love the poetry as well. And I remember that I hated to have to analyze it, to come down into the mechanics of. And if you would ask me to write a poem, I think that would be the part where I shy away. Will I be as blatant as just rhyme things that come A, B, in that kind of rhyme mechanism, or will I just pretend it's a poem by writing a sentence with a lot of spaces? So how would you describe how these poems start to flow through you?
I think this is exactly what you just explained right now, was also what kept me from having the courage of starting to write. Like just the fear of, I could never be as good as XYZ. And how I write now, or like within the last 3 years, I think, this book came to be, I was writing these poems in a time frame of 3 years, never really having in my mind that this will be something I want to publish. And I think this is how it worked, because I never had the pressure of it has to be good enough for someone else to enjoy. So I was just going along and writing, and I can't really say how it happens, because sometimes it's just a feeling that I have inside of me, like a kind of a pressure feeling, that where I'm feeling a little, I can't even put it into words what I'm feeling, but I'm not feeling very good, not positive in a way. It's just like a little limbo phase situation. And this is when I know that I have to write. And nothing is in my head. There are no words. There's nothing I think about I want to write about. I just sit down, and pretty much as soon as the pen in my hand touches the paper, it starts. It just comes out. Then other times I have had maybe a conversation and I can't let that go because it just did something to me, positive or negative, it doesn't even matter. And then I sit down with the intention of trying to resolve this, I don't know, confusion in my head about that conversation. So then I kind of have a topic, but still again, it's not like really words in my head. And then sometimes I'm just walking around and then words just pop in my head. And then I need to find paper and pen quickly to not lose it again. So it's totally different. Sometimes it's really just for me to reflect and cope with something, and I just have to release that feeling that is stuck in myself. And sometimes it's really a topic or a thing that I want to write about, and then I take that time. And yeah, it happens also everywhere. Like I try to bring my notebook everywhere nowadays, just because I know that the inspiration can hit everywhere, or that feeling coming up can hit everywhere. So yeah, it's yeah difficult to say.
So, do you believe writers are born, or can writing be something that you learn to do and get to flow in yourself? You know, get the flow of seeing words and hearing yourself through practice.
Hmm. I think so. Yes, I think as soon as there is the want of writing, I think then you already are a born writer. Because if something interests you, then this is supposed to be a part of you in this lifetime. I really truly believe that. So even though you haven't written anything in, I don't know, 30, 40 years, and then that urge is just coming up because of maybe seeing someone else writing or whatever it may be, then it was always, I think, in you. And so yeah, I think everyone can learn it to. And what I mean by that is just like learn to have the confidence of just doing it, because I think we are all able to write, because we are all kind of able to communicate. And it's just when we start overthinking that it blocks us to actually do it and let it out and let it flow.
But this could be a good point to read one of your poems to us. Would you care
Yeah,
to?
I would love to. Okay, so this is page 92. Finding peace in the moment is a new favorite thing of mine. It makes me feel more alive than anything else. Calm, steady. Only my breathing and my heartbeat remind me of the physical shell I chose this time. Everything else floats and hovers around me, and I can feel the energy flowing. I really like remember when I was writing this, because that was definitely also how you just like said it really nicely right now. Like just coming from healing, that was really a moment where I realized how much of just listening to myself and my inner voice and the practice of meditation is really helping me to calm down and to be able to listen to what is really important inside of myself, and not be distracted by all of these thoughts and confusion in my head that is fueled by the fear.
Yeah, and you were mentioning that we are ready to discard old people because sometimes of their kind of strict worldview. I mean, we've probably all intersected with some elder people on the street, and sometimes they seem so sweet, and then they kind of unpack all their things. Then the loveliness goes away. But why did you come across your in your research, did you come across why do we do that? Is it like we are only interested in the new, or why are we not seeing the wisdom in what they have to say? Do they not package that right? Package, how that sounds. But do they not talk the right language for us? Or why is it that we have stopped the intersection with them?
Yeah, well, good question. I don't know. I think it started with individualism, and um, especially the United States is a very individualistic culture. So if we're only looking at what I call the form, the form and the fire element, if we think of it all as fire and competition and just what we see on the surface, then yeah, you would think that older people are useless because it's all about your body and your body is falling apart. But as we know, as yoga teachers and yoga health coaches, there's more to it. There's this, what you want to call it, spirit or essence, whatever your beliefs are, there's something inside you that is so much more than your physical body. So I think somehow when we disconnected from that, we lost this this importance of growing older, because that is the vata, the inspiration stage of life. And
Mm.
that's what I want to bring that back, because I think we need it more than ever, especially in our country, in the United States. We're in a very divisive time. And so I think that the wisdom of seeing the big picture of the vata stage of life is much needed now, and being vulnerable, being
Mm.
vulnerable, because you are vulnerable. You need help when you're older.
Yeah.
People could take advantage of an older person because they maybe don't have as much physical strength, or your mind gets a little slower. You can work to like you can work to alleviate that, or mitigate that.
Mm.
But yeah.
Let's go back to the blue zones. You said there's five, and then you suddenly mentioned five places in Europe. You know, Sardinia. I used to live in Ireland. I was in Sardinia, so I'm familiar with all the places you mentioned in um, Europe. But do you mean by zones? Now I'm losing a little bit the sight of how do we define blue zones?
Yeah. Well, they're environments and places where demographers could go and find a high number of people who are living, and they could verify their birth certificates, that were living over 100. The reason they call it blue zones is because literally the first demographer circled the area, and I think the first place was in Sardinia, and they circled that area with a blue pen and said this area is a blue zone.
Oh, wow.
So then they it became a term, blue zone. It became a thing.
And what is so special about these areas? I mean, you said, okay, the men in particular, they engage in physical activity, obviously. If they climb, they are out in nature, they're out in wind and weather, they're not interested in electronics as we are, and they also stay away, obviously, from the beating of the daily onslaught of bad news, like newspapers and whatever we engage with. What else is characteristically for the blue zone, or is there anything else to it?
Yeah, there's so many uh commonalities, and then each one has a few unique things that are of interest. And I mentioned one of them, which is the men live longer in Sardinia.
Yeah.
And so some of the commonalities are moving naturally. Nobody goes to the gym. Uh, and their eating habits are all a little different, because of course that's based on your environment. And as I mentioned before, four of the places are traditional, more traditional cultures, and they were geographically isolated. So do you want me to name the
Yeah,
five
please.
zones? Okay, let's see if I can do them. Sometimes I forget one. But there's Icaria in Greece, the Nicoya Peninsula, Costa Rica, and then there is Sardinia, Okinawa, Japan,
Uh-huh.
and then Loma Linda, California. And that's the exception. Loma Linda's where there's a high concentration of Seventh-day Adventists, and that's a religion, a Christian religion. But it's very interesting. They were always very interested in health, and they formed a strong community.
Mm-hmm.
If you think of uh, yeah, many Kellogg's cornflakes, which is a cereal. Now it's not really thought of as a health food, but when it started, that was kind of an unusual uh, healthy breakfast back maybe 100 years ago, and that brand was started by Seventh Day Adventists. So they were always trying to look for healthy ways of living, and they self isolated. And the reason I think that's interesting is because I think that shows us that in the modern era, we could set up an environment that would be like a blue zone. We don't necessarily have to geographically isolate ourselves, but we could set things up where we're supporting each other.
Yeah, when you are a lover of food, as you are, you probably have to very much distinguish between when are you feeling very hospital to, do you say that in English, hospital to yourself, like
hospitable.
Hospitable, thank you. To yourself, or when is it time to maybe have and develop a different relationship to your own food consuming? Is there something that has come forth in writing and this book and kind of looking deeper into the subject?
I think we live in a time where food is really a sort of identifier for many people. The choices of what and how to eat are part of a statement of who you are and how you want to be seen in the world. So, I mean, in the book, I talk about the hashtag food porn, and how it's one of the most popular trending things on Instagram. And then you have hashtag eat clean, and there are all these different ways in which I suppose food can be a way to try and distinguish yourself. And I mean, I'm a vegetarian, kind of edging towards being more vegan. And for me, that is a kind of ethical choice, because of the way that meat is and animals are treated and meat is manufactured. And so I think that there's definitely for me this dimension to eating, but it can also become quite oppressive and restrictive. And so there's such a joy in food, and there's such a possibility for connection with others, and such a possibility for discovery of flavors and places and traditions. And so I wanted to write something that really celebrated that, and the possibilities it gives us to talk about bigger issues of how we live together and share, while acknowledging that there is definitely a sense of responsibility in what you choose to do, to eat, and with whom and how.
And that I love about the book. I love the celebrative part, in a way that I have come from a yogic discipline where I often felt and heard conversations around food that were very constricted, in a way like, you have to be vegan, you have to be vegetarian as a yogi, and then it's all, people get so obsessed about like what's right and wrong, so we're losing the connection to food and what it can do between you and me, in this kind of sense of becoming a guest at somebody's house, and finding common ground of likes and dislikes, instead of becoming so almost like as if we're trying to have the right theory around everything, even around food. And I think that's not yogic at all. I mean, yogic to me, it means to respect food for what it is, so it needs to be celebrated in some form, and that we can engage with it. And I loved about it that you truly engage and are so so open hearted about your sharing about how you relate to food. I think there's not many people who would say what you say in the book about themselves. I like to eat that and I need to have that, and that were the parts where my heart really kind of opened up and where I felt like, wow, there is a lot of guts behind what you're writing. It takes to me it would take tremendous openness and clarity with myself to be able to write that and bring that forward to a broader audience. Did you feel the same about it, like a self-revelation?
Thank you very much for acknowledging that. I mean, I must say this book turned out to be a more personal book than I had thought it would be when I was writing. And it seemed to me that one way in which I could approach the difficult aspects of this book, which are really about how we want to and can live with each other, was also to be frank about my own doubts and struggles and greed, because however much we might aspire to being more ethical, responsible people, we're full of contradictions and full of weaknesses and flaws. And I think for me, I really have a lot of respect and admiration for people who are so consistent and who can be so kind of self-denying in many ways, and therefore live very sort of upright lives. But that is not always possible for all of us. And I think sometimes people maybe don't want to do something because they think they can't do it completely. Whereas I think, if you just stop eating meat, you only eat it a couple of times a week, that's much better than, thinking, oh, I have to be vegetarian. It's just take the steps that are possible for you at this particular moment. And also, I think that's a kind of generosity too, to recognize that we don't always get it right completely, and to just sort of encourage oneself and others in trying to find a way to make better choices.
If you enjoy listening to my podcast, please consider to become a patron at patreon.com/AlexandraKreis and pledge your donation.